Hi, this is Marty Lecklatter. Welcome to this tutorial on setting up MySQL on Docker and using it with HCL Link in DominoVolt. This video accompanies a tutorial which you can download in PDF form from the DominoVolt showroom or the DominoVolt wiki. I'm going to use this document to go through the MySQL setup steps. Now this assumes that you have a Docker environment to install MySQL. The first thing you're going to do is a Docker pull to download the image, and then you're going to install and configure a few things. You'll issue the docker run command to take that image and turn it into a working container, and you want to use this exact command. And then you're going to issue a command, docker logs, and you're going to generate the password for root. You'll then log in with the user root using that generated password. And then we move on to setting up some additional users and changing some passwords. We'll change the root password to dbaadmin #1. We'll create a database that we'll use for the exercise in this tutorial called demo. We're going to create another user, and this is going to be the user that we're going to use in our work, dbuser, and the password is going to be dbuser. We're going to grant all privileges, and we're going to set the authentication method to MySQL native password. And then we'll restart MySQL, and we'll log in with this new user of dbuser. All right, next, we'll create a couple of tables. So we already created the database. We want to set our environment to use that database, and then we can copy this command here to create the customer table. We'll add a record to the customer table using this insert command, and then we're going to create another table called orders, and then we'll add a record to orders. So this is my environment. I have it installed on a laptop. If I want to get into MySQL, I can issue the docker exec command, dbuser. I'm in at the MySQL command line. I can use demo, which is the database that we set up. And then I could say select all from customers. Now I have more than one record in there because I've been using DominoVolt to interact with this database. And then I can do the same for orders. And there we have it. So this is the base database in tables that we're going to work with in HCL Link in DominoVolt. Now that we have a database set up, we can go over to HCL Link and create a connection. So I'm looking at the Link widget client. We call it the Link widget client because that's what it says in the URL. This is the client where you're going to be doing 90% of your work related to DominoVolt. On here you can see different connections. I currently have a MySQL connection set up, so I'll go through the motions to create another one. The first thing you want to do is give the connection a name, and it's going to warn me that I have this name already, so I'll put in MySQL2. And then I can pick the JDBC adapter. You can see there are many different connection resources here. So adapters are essentially just resources to connect to different data sources. So the one we want is JDBC. And this JDBC adapter can be used to virtually connect to any relational database, whether that's MySQL, Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, you name it. Next, we'll give it the URL for the MySQL database. So the format here is JDBC and then colon MySQL colon forward leaning / and then the domain name for your MySQL server, and then a colon, and then the port of 3306. So it's always going to be port 3306. In demo is the name of the database that we're connecting to, the demo database. And then we'll add DB user, which is the user we created with the password DB user. And then we can test this connection, and we can see that this tests successfully. And then we can go ahead and save this, and we have a connection. Now I'm not going to save it because I already have a connection, so I'll back out of this. Now that we have our connection, we can start creating some actions. To create an action, we click into the connection. You can see I have a few actions already created, including list customer, add customer, and update customer, which are covered in the tutorial. Let's create another list customers so you can see how this is done from scratch. We'll call this list customers 2 because it needs to be unique. Now there's a couple of ways I can go on this. In the tutorial, I instruct you to execute a query. So this could be any SQL query which is going to get data. So in this case, the SQL query, and we did this in the command line interface, is select all from customers. And you can put the database name in front of it. Even though this connection is specific to demo, that's not going to hurt. Then you'd click next, and then you would generate the schema, and then save it, and it is deployed. So at that point I have an action, and that action would be exposed in the DominoVolt service catalog. So let's go back into this action, and I'll show you the other way that you could take this. So instead of executing a query, I could just say read from a table, and the table is customers. It already knows the database, and then I could generate the schema. So both are pretty simple to do. I elected to go with the SQL statement instead. On the DominoVolt side, I would create an app with a table in it, and the table would have fields that mirror those fields which are in the SQL table. And I have one here. I'll use the on-show event. You can use any event, a button, whatever you like. And what we'll do is go to the service catalog, and we'll toggle over to MySQL. And you can see the list of actions that I have here. So I've got list customers, and there's no inputs for this one. So what I'll do is just go grab fields that I'm after. So the customer ID, customer name, contact name, address, city, postal code, and then country. So there's my action mapped into my DominoVolt table on the on-show event. So that means when I preview this page, the records are read and populated into the table. Now we'll move on to adding a record to the table. During the MySQL setup, we added one record to the customer table, and in the tutorial there was a SQL statement, an insert statement, and it said add to the database demo customers, and with these fields, these are the values. So what we're going to do is take that statement, and instead of using those values, we're going to use parameters. Now the way the parameters work is that they start and end with a %, and they have 3 different items in it, separated by a colon. The first is the name, next one is the default value, and then the description. So this would be the name that you'd actually see when you're mapping your items in MySQLVolt. This is the default value if no value is given, and you can think of this as your long name. Now for simplicity, I just keep them all the same, but you need to have 3 in here. So you can have these parameters in any SQL statement. You can have them in any URL. You can have them in any action that you're creating. And when this action is created, it knows those are parameters. So then those parameters appear in MySQLVolt. So let's take a look at the add customer action in Link. I'm going to edit this one as opposed to creating it from scratch. Here's the name, add customer. And the operation is execute a parameterized DML. So this is data manipulation language. So that's a set of SQL commands that update and modify records as opposed to merely querying them. And you can see why I showed you the DML or the SQL statement in the editor. It's a little hard to see here in this little box, but it's all there. So that's the input statement. And then you simply just generate the schema. And that's it. On the MySQLVolt side, you'll want a form with the fields that you want to enter to add the record. So in this case, I just created one underneath the table. See name, contact, address, city, postal code, country. And you'll want a button or perhaps a link, which I use in my case, to invoke the add customer service. So I have that here. And you can see the add customer service is being invoked. And that add customer service was created from the add customer action, which you can see here. Right, so that's the action that we created in Link. It's exposed here in this configuration. Essentially turns it into a service, which I can then pick from the service catalog. And it's all inputs, so you notice there's no outputs. And what I'm doing is going from the fields in that form, so the fields that are just below the table, and we're pushing all those into the database table. You may have noticed there's some other stuff going on here with this JavaScript. This is a listener, and what I'm doing is I'm listening to see when the add customer is complete. Then I go ahead and I list the customers in the table again so I can see that the new customer is there. For the folks that aren't that familiar with JavaScript, this may look scary, but don't fret, it's pretty easy to do. If you use the control space for both selecting the service and code snippets, what you can do is build this without writing any code. So I'm going to hit control space twice, and I'm going to get the listener, otherwise known as the on-call service handler, and I'll go ahead and then pick by getting the service. I'm going to hit control space once here. You can see how I can pick the different items in the application, including services. So in this case, it's the add customer service that I want to listen to see if it's complete. And then where it says do something, when this is done, I'll click control space twice again. And this time what I want to do is call a service. And this is how you call a service via JavaScript. And I'm going to then click control space once. And then what I want to do is list customers. So that's all I needed to do to build that out. So if I look at this in the running application, I've filled out the form, and I can say add that customer. And if I scroll to the bottom, you can see that there's a new customer ID that's generated, and there's the test customer. Now in my case, I went ahead and created a delete customer action as well. And that also has a listener, so now that test record is gone. Next, we'll take a look at updating a record, and this is very similar to adding a new record. So instead of an insert, it's an update statement. And you can see the different fields. And what's unique about an update is you've got to tell it what record to update, and the unique identifier is the customer ID. So we're updating these fields where the customer ID equals what the ID equals. And of course we covered parameters again. So let's flip over to link. I can see for this action that again it's a execute parameterized DML, and the statement that I was showing you is right here. And then I simply generate the schema, save it, and it's deployed. Over to MySQLVolt, there's a few things I need to point out. First is on the on-click event on the table, when we select a row, what we're going to do is we're going to get that row, and then we're going to set fields in the form based on fields in the table. Right, so each one of these corresponds to a field, and we're simply just pushing the fields from the table over into the form, including the customer ID, which we need to figure out which record to update. Right, so then customer ID is there. The other values are pushed into the form. I can make the changes, and then the update link has a service call, update customer, and what I'm doing is, you can see it's all inputs. I'm passing the ID, the customer, the name, the address, the city, postal code, etc. from the form, pushing it into the database. Right, and the same code I used before for the listener. So when I update the customer, I want to see the update reflected in the database. There it is. So in the running application, we can see that when we click on a row, those values are pushed over into the form. If I want to update cardinal, put in the value, and update cardinal, and I can see the update here. Back that out, and it's backed out. So far I've taken you through everything we've done on the customer tab. I've done the same thing on orders, and then on this third tab there's a SQL query, and I've done a join between orders and customers. So you've got all the knowledge you need to do this. Follow the PDF, and good luck. Thank you.